everyone, once again. It's been a minute. Welcome to today's lecture, which will be Introduction to Selenium. We will be diving in and talking a bit about some general information about Selenium, what it is, what it does, how it does all the operations that we as testers want to make use of, and then also tackle some examples on how to note down waiters, locators, and it rhymes. It's also something to remember it by. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen now. Let me just see. I can do it. There we go. All right. So now, before we start with the lecture, because we will be talking a bit about code in this and the next lecture, I drafted up a few code snippets that we have listed here, and we're going to do a short exercise before we dive into the content. So the idea is I will show you a code snippet, so a few lines of code. All of them have some kind of mistake. And what you can do is when I show the snippet, you can write in the chat what is the issue with the code that we're seeing right now and a potential fix that you would recommend for the same. So it's basically everything that you have covered so far from fundamentals of programming. They're quite straightforward, so it's not something that we have yet to learn. And it will be useful moving later in this lecture and the next. So do we have any questions, or is this little exercise clear? Let me see if there's any questions. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm just going to jump right into the first snippet. Wonderful. Thank you, Francesco, for mentioning. So this is the first snippet that we have here. So what do you all think is wrong with what we are displaying here? Do you have any idea what could be causing some issues or similar? Again, you can write the answers in the live chat. So what could be the issue? What could be causing it? I see some people are now writing down in the chat. I see been wrote no return. Okay, that's a good answer. Let's wait and see if somebody else wants to note down something differently maybe. I see Valentina wrote void question mark. Okay, that's an interesting response as well. Let's see if somebody else wants to add something. All right, I don't see anybody else noting down anything. So in the interest of time, I would say that both your answers are technically correct. We wrote any import. That's also a good take. You don't need to stress too much about the import. So these are just random snippets. So we don't need to worry about those. But I will get back to the two answers. So you mentioned return, and that is correct. So we have here, as we can see, a class. So that was like a general something that we use to create objects, right? And then we have this method. And this method, which is some kind of addition method, is of type int. And if you remember, when you have some kind of type for a method, so integer, string, boolean, whatever it may be, it always has to return something. So in this case, we only have int sum, and then we do some addition without implementing a return. So the correct answer would be what Binu mentioned, no return, which means that I will just need to add a return sum here to make this work as expected. And also what Valentina mentioned, void, that could be correct. So we could actually change what we do in this method. So we can make it void, and then we don't need to add a return. We just need to print out some kind of result that we have here. So both answers are very well thought of. So good job for that bit. And let's move on to a bit more, let's say, tricky snippets. Okay, let's see the second. what are your thoughts? What do you think actually is wrong here? Can I zoom? Yeah, of course. Let me see. Is it better like this? Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks for the heads up. Again, don't worry too much about the imports. All right. I see Francesco wrote infinite loop. I see Bin wrote no increment of the I. All right. I see more people are noting down their answers. We'll wait a few seconds to see if somebody else wants to add something. Won't exit the loop. Yeah. Okay. I'll keep the answers coming. All right. I don't see any more people typing. And yeah, so both Francesco and Minu, you are correct. So it's interesting. One provided the answer and then you also provided the solution. So yeah, as we can see from the code here, again, we're in the main method. We have this variable, which needs to be added in a loop, which is equal to 0 here. And then when we go into the loop, we essentially say exit the loop after you get a number that is greater than 5. Unfortunately, we never have that number because we never increment I, or in other words, I always remains 0. So because this will always be 0, we will always be printing the same line and we will never essentially exit the loop. And as Binu mentioned, there is no increment, so all we can do here is just increase the value of I by 1, by 2. So this is all dependent on, of course, however you need to structure it. But in this case, we'll do this for simplicity's sake. All right, wonderful. You guys are doing a great job. So let's move on to the third snippet. Right. Now here you might notice something that we are going to learn in this lecture, but don't focus too much on the types of variables. So you can try to see what could be the issue that we are doing here. So think more in terms of classes and instances of classes. So what do you think could be causing an issue here? So maybe as a helper, so we see this is our own test class. Then we have this other class, which is some WebDriver out there. It creates some kind of object of its type and then says it's null. And then it tries to get something from the class, but it's null. So what do you think could be, what is the potential issue that we see here? I see some people are now typing again in the live chat. I see binRoadDriver.get is not equating to any attribute or variable. Okay, that's a good answer. Very nice. Let's see if somebody else has maybe a different approach or solution to this. And don't be shy, everyone. So there are no wrong answers. This is just to help us remember some concepts because we will need some of them for the lecture later on. So feel free to jump in and try to see if you can maybe have the correct answer. I see no one else is typing in. And yeah, Binu, your answer is correct. So it's not equating to any attribute. As you can see, we are actually writing here null, meaning that when we try to get something using the null value from this class, which is nothing, we won't really ever get this URL that we're trying to reach. One possible solution for this, which we will discuss more in detail in the next lecture and a bit in this one, is you can actually use, as you remember from classes, instantiate the object from the class. So we write new, and then this is something new, but I'm just gonna write it here so that it might stay in your minds. So this is one way you can call a driver, and we'll talk about the driver later, and you just assign it some kind of value. If this was a different class, like let's say class animal, this is dog, then we do a new the class that we want to assign the value. So again, very, very well done for jumping into this bit. And let's move on to the next. Okay, so here we have two classes. So you might see we have two methods, and there is a very tiny issue. So what do you think is the issue in this scenario? We can also see that the other class is inheriting from the parent. So maybe that could be a hint. So you can maybe notice a small issue within the code. Again, feel free to uh, express what you feel is the right solution. There are no wrongs. So uh, again, this is just a practice to kind of trace back on what we learned in some of the previous lectures. I can maybe give also a little hint. We see here we have this make sound method, and it prints some kind of sound, right, inside it. And then in the other class, we essentially inherit something from here. And then we have the same method, but we do the sound of the dog, actually. So what could be the issue that we are seeing here? I see public missing. Well, they wrote public missing. Okay, that's a good answer. Let's see. I see more people are writing in the chat. Make sound dash make sound with a different wording. Okay, yeah, that's also a very, very good answer. Let's see if somebody else is noting down something. I'll wait a few more seconds. Okay. Yeah, so basically, there are a few things wrong. One is public missing, so we don't have any essentially selectors, so we don't mention whether something is public, private, or protected. So we're just writing the method name, which can cause issues even in the editor, which is a very good catch. And then the other, and it may be, let's say, more hard to notice issue as well, is the difference in the method. So we're trying to override some kind of method, right? So use the same method, but print something else. And you see in the first place, we have a capital S here. And then in the second, we have a small one. Of course, this can be resolved by just adding the same letter and then reusing it like that. But it's a very nice catch. So very good job, Susan and Valentina as well for the encapsulation of both these methods. So that worked out pretty well. Wonderful. We have a few more snippets left. So let's move on to the next one. Let's see some conditionals. So we have some kind of conditions being present here. What do you think can be the issue for what this code doesn't work? I see some people are writing in the chat. Right. Also, every one of you are doing a fantastic job. So keep up the good work for that. I see logically is not very well coded. Okay, yeah, that's a good catch, Valentina. All right. I see being wrote here, age won't check if not equal to 18, logic issue. Okay. I also see as 19 should not be minor. Okay. Wait if somebody else wants to add something. All right, nobody's adding anything, so I'm just gonna go through it. And yeah, first of all, Valentina, yeah, the logic is definitely a bit off. So it could be greater or equal than 18 for an adult, and then other cases would be a minor. So that's a very, very logical catch. Very nice job for that. And also, we mentioned that the logic is incorrect, meaning the operator that we have is not the right one. So we're going to have one equal inside the if. And essentially, we want to add two so that we can actually check whether the value that we want to be there is correct. So when we do this, we essentially assign a value, and in this case, we actually check if that value is equal to something or whether it is not equal to something. So if it's greater than, if it's, let's say, adding an exclamation mark here, it's not equal. So we need two operators, one next to the other, so we can actually compare the result. And that is a fantastic catch. Very well done yet again. I'm still awake. Yeah, that's great. So let's move on to the last two. We have this small conditional statement once again. And what do you think could be the issue here? Just wrote always the minor details that cause major issues. Yeah, definitely, definitely. All right. I see Valentina wrote, if what is true. Well, technically, when you look at this snippet, it's not so much to do with this true bit. I'll give you that as a hint. So imagine there's some true statement inside it. You don't need to focus too much on this true here. Again, these are just some random snippets I collected and modified a bit on my own. I see Binu wrote else condition. Okay. Let's see if somebody else has any other opinions. I see Francesco wrote 20 what? Okay. I mean, there is no condition. Yeah, I mean, the condition is if something is true, then it prints out 20, but you don't need to focus too much about it. So this, I will tell you this is, I mean, this probably won't be ever written like this, but don't focus too much on that. I sort of just wrote percentage, integer number. Yeah, there is actually an integer here. So in discount is equal to 20. So it does have a value. Maybe if you remember, so if you notice, we have this conditional here, right? So it says if something is true, right? And then in open brackets, inside the brackets, we have declared a variable of type integer, so some kind of whole number, right? Int discount equals 20. And if you notice, we are actually trying to print it, right? We're trying to print the discount, but we're doing it outside the if statement. Does that make sense to you, or do you think we should change something here? Wonderful, Francesco. Uh, no return, or we print inside. So no return, we don't need the return. Yeah, and we can actually do it one way, copy this and put it inside the if statement. That is one way to do it. And another way is to copy this entire line, so int discount 20, and just do it outside the statement so we can use it anywhere inside the code. So you can go both ways. You can do it outside the statement by declaring the variable there, and then you can also just copy this inside it depending on how you need. Both are correct answers. As see Valentina wrote, if statement doesn't make sense. Yeah, don't worry about it too much. Again, these are some snippets, random snippets, so it's not really that much to the logic as it is to these little bits of code errors. And I see being rolled, we have to declare a value outside. Yep, that is, as I mentioned, one of the ways you can declare this outside. So probably you can do it here if you want. One way is to do it here, and then just assign the value inside. So you can do this probably. Let me just write this. You can do this, and then this will work. And you can also copy paste this inside if you feel you need that more. Okay, we have one more to go before we continue with the materials. We have a switch case. It has a few issues, I would say. So you can try and let me know what you think is the issue that we have here. I see some people are typing in the chat. See, Francesco wrote case number 5 has no break. Okay. Sabine also wrote something similar. There are no breaks in some conditions. Okay. Right, I don't see others writing down anything, so in the interest of time, yeah, so that is correct. Some of the conditions, as you can say, number 1, number 2, and number 5, they don't have any breaks. And if we don't have a break, and let's say case 5 happens, then it will also print out the default. And we don't want the default to happen. So if we enter the 5th day, which is Friday, we don't want to print out as well that it's the weekend, because Friday is definitely not the weekend, right? So a few of the cases are missing the breaks, as well as the one after default. So very well done to all of you for taking part into this. Hope you got a little refresh, let's say, from some of the coding practices earlier, because we will be talking about them today and the next lecture a bit more even. So yeah, let's dive right into the materials for today. So we will be talking about Selenium. This is, I would say, the most widely used tool for UI automation and maybe even for automation testing in general. And there is this interesting example here that I can actually use to let you know, because some of you might have seen such things. So if you remember, in these older games, there was this option where you can just let the character play out the entire game. So they kind of go through everything inside the game. They try to pass the level. And this is essentially what happens when you're doing automation testing. So what we want to do essentially is simulate behavior that some user or even us as testers would probably do for some scenarios, so that we can check whether the page works in a faster pace. So we're trying to do whatever we can do manually, but with a little bit less time and more efficiency. And it is similar to how you've seen some of those games play out themselves. So you will notice when we do a bit more hands-on Selenium practices that some browser windows are open, buttons are clicked, searches are populated with words, so they work in the same manner. Now, the main objectives that we will have for today's lecture is to get an idea of what Selenium is, so what are some features and how it basically functions. So how does it allow us to do all these interactions with the web pages? Go through some commands, because we will need them for the hands-on lecture, and then see how it is integrated in an organization and general testing practices, meaning how is Selenium used in everyday projects on different client needs, and what capabilities does it provide. Okay, so let's dive right into what is Selenium. So some of you may heard or know a bit about Selenium. Selenium is an open source automation tool. We have mentioned it a bit in previous lectures, not so much in detail. And it is basically the most widely used automation testing tool out there. It is also the testing tool that is most often used for people who are just starting with automation testing, because it is in a way something that has a very let's say big learning curve. You can learn a lot from it due to it being complex and simple at the same time. So it provides a lot of challenges, but it has solutions to those that kind of try to make you find them yourself or read documentations, which again makes it a lot easier when you go to other frameworks. In addition to that, it is something that can use multiple browsers like Chrome, Opera, Safari, Firefox, and it's supported in a very big number of languages. So Java, the one that we will be using in our case, Python, C#, Perl, PHP. So we have plenty of support for it, and it can be deployed basically on any platform. So you can use it on Windows, Linux, Mac. So it supports all of them. Now, um, what is interesting about Selenium is it itself is a tool that was previously used in a different way, and then some of those things that were, let's say, building blocks for Selenium were added as separate applications. I see a question from Francesco. Is it used for mobile applications too? I suppose that's a very good question, and I'll get to it near the end of this section. We do have a bit about the mobile applications as well to mention. And basically, we have, for example, this first one, Selenium Integrated Development Environment, or Selenium IDE for short. This is a browser extension, meaning you can install it on Google, on Firefox, so on and so forth. So you can just add it as an extension to the browser, similar to when you have some spell checkers, for example. And you don't have to have any programming experience for it. It's otherwise known as a test recording tool, if you might have heard of it in that terminology. And what it does is you simply just add it, open it from the browser extensions, and then you have the option to record everything you do on the browser. So if you are on, let's say, Amazon, and you want to write a script for searching a valid term, you can click record on the ID, and then you just do whatever you want to do as a user on the page. So you just do all the actions, stop the recording, and Selenium saves all of that for you with detailed steps. And the best thing about it, you can actually download all of those steps into code. So you can download whatever you recorded. The code is not the cleanest, it's not the best code you can get, but it saves on time if you need to look for specific locators. For the time being, I believe that this is having some issues with Chrome only recently, because I had a lecture on this as well. So you might want to try it out with Firefox, Edge, so some other browsers aside from Chrome, but it's a very neat tool, and I highly recommend if you have the opportunity to give it a go. Then we have Selenium Remote Control. Now, this is in a way, let's say, the prehistoric Selenium. This was before the version with WebDriver ever came into play. And what was the idea with Selenium Remote Control? It is called Remote Control because you have your tests, right? You have your code for your scripts. And then there is a remote client, rather like a server, which you push the code to it, and then it needs to run it against the web browsers. It was a lot more complicated, and although it could handle many, let's say, domains, browser types, programming languages as well, it did have a bit of a harder time performance-wise, and also a lot of maintenance, and also you were pretty much very dependent on that remote server, which is usually not ideal when working on larger scale project. This is currently deprecated, so it's no longer in use. But if you do a bit of more research on the web, you probably could find some older versions of it, and as well as some IDEs, so older version of some editors. Maybe with Eclipse it works best, and you can, if you're interested, try and see what it does. But again, it probably will never be used on projects. Moving on, we have Selenium Grid and Selenium WebDriver, and these are the ones that you will most often come across on projects. So first off, Selenium Grid. This is basically a Selenium add-on, I would say, that allows you to do, let's say, parallel testing. So you can actually execute multiple scenarios at the same time. So let's say I want to test selecting an article, searching for a valid term, and let's say opening a drop down and maybe sorting something on the given page. So you can actually run all of those in parallel, which saves on time and efficiency, of course, because you will cover a lot more ground, meaning you have more time for other tasks. However, the cons of it are that it is a bit more complex, and it's not something that is very beginner friendly, especially with Selenium. However, it can be used as you move down the line and gain more experience. And you have to keep in mind for this, it is only for specific scenarios. So if you, for example, want to test, let's say, a form for payment, and you need to be logged in first, then you won't be able to log in parallel and test the form. So this option is not going to work at all. And finally, the one that you will definitely be using on projects is Selenium WebDriver, the one that we will be also using in the hands-on lecture. And this is basically the bread and butter of Selenium. So it is supported in a multitude of languages, as mentioned before. It can be integrated with various testing frameworks. You already learned a bit about TestNG. It can also be used with JUnit, NUnit. It can be used with PyTest. So you can actually combine it with a big amount of testing frameworks. And going back to the question that we discussed a bit earlier, that Francesco said for the mobile testing, it does not support mobile or desktop applications. That is, I would say, one of the biggest drawbacks in recent times. And that is because you have actually frameworks or tools rather like Playwright. And for example, Playwright has integration with NUnit and XUnit, so you don't need to install additional frameworks, and it can test mobile, it can test applications, so even tablets, which is amazing, but it is because it is built on the foundations of Selenium. So Selenium, you would probably need to install additional plugins to be able to test mobile and desktop applications, and those packages vary. So there are no strict packages. You have to install this to test mobile applications, but it depends on what you need to use. So hopefully that answers that question. However, again, this is, I would say, the foundation of automation testing. And if you manage to master Selenium WebDriver, it will definitely give you a lot of strong background and adaptation to other frameworks. Now, some of the, let's say, negative sides of Selenium are one thing, it is open source, so it's free, and it doesn't have any tech support, which I would actually say is also supported by the fact that there are a multitude of forums and in detailed documentation. So even if you get stuck at certain points, there's always some answer that you can find on those forums. So it has a lot of support from the community, which makes this, let's say, a bit of a positive side for this point. It can't be used for mobile or desktop applications, as we talked a bit now. It doesn't manage tests on its own, so it needs to run with TestNG or JUnit. As I mentioned, if you use other tools like Cypress or Playwright, you don't need to install these as well. But for Selenium, it is definitely a must. And then it does not handle image testing well, which is also something I recommend if you want to read about after these lectures. Essentially, you can do visual testing with some tools. So it makes a screenshot and compares the state of one screenshot with the state of another screenshot of a page and lets you know if there are any style differences. So maybe the profile picture is cut out on one of the images, and it determines why this is so. But nevertheless, these are basically the limitations of Selenium in itself. Now, one thing I really want to add here, it is very important for when you go into the testing sphere, let's say, to have a understanding of WebDriver specifically. So when you're using Selenium, I'd say this is important because you will see in different projects, you will need to be thinking about performance a lot when you're writing these test scripts. So I have an image here that I've constructed. So hopefully you can see it. Let me know if I need to zoom in. So when you're using Selenium, this is essentially what happens with your code, or rather how you perform the actions. I added a side-by-side with another tool so you can see what happens. So you have the code. So this is where we're writing all the scripts. So you're going to see a lot of examples in the next lecture for this. So you write your code and then you use WebDriver. So this is, you will notice we'll use the drivers a lot. You use WebDriver to communicate with a browser. So this is a Selenium driver that you install. And then once you have that driver, it communicates with the browser driver, and then it goes into the real browser. So essentially, what you do is you have a piece of code, you send it somewhere so it can be translated, and that translator then sends it to the browser. And you can download specific browsers. So when you download them, you download Chromium, you download Firefox, WebKit, so depending on what you will need. Whereas for other and let's say more new frameworks, it just goes, they have a built-in driver, so you don't need to initialize a driver, you don't need to install it. You just have your code, it takes it and runs it with a browser, which is a lot faster. And that's why I mentioned it's very important to understand what the structure of Selenium is. So you have your code, you run it through your WebDriver, the WebDriver goes to the browser driver, and then it goes to the browser. So it needs to go into two steps before it does all the operations on the actual browser. So this is not that much of a, let's say, time issue, but it's good to note this for when you come on projects and you need to maybe think about what your approach to automating the tests would be. Okay. Oops. Do we have any questions so far? No, it's a bit more talking today, but it's good to kind of get the fundamentals good and going before we jump into the practical parts. That's a great question, Binu. So yes, it is slower in comparison to other frameworks. I mean, the slower bit is not like it's not going to be drastic if you're running 10 scenarios. So it's not going to be that this executes the job in, let's say, 5 minutes and this takes 50. But it is slower when you have larger scale projects. So it is important to, again, think how much test do you have? What amount of time are they running? So maybe a test can run for 15 minutes, some tests run for 10 seconds. So this is variable. And if you have a multitude of tests with different times, this will take, you will notice a difference in time. We also had a project where we used Selenium and then we replaced it with Playwright, but our suite had maybe about, don't get me too literal, but somewhere around 65 tests, and all of them took from 40 seconds to a minute, I would say. And when we transferred to Playwright, the time was probably around 20 minutes faster, just because it runs it directly to the browser. So when you have a lot of tests, it makes a big difference. But for small scale projects, perfectly fine. Okay. If there are no questions, I will move on to the next section. No worries. Okay, so now we know what is Selenium in a nutshell, let's say. So how does it work? Well, Selenium has these, let me call it elements, which are known as locators. And locators, as the name suggests, are things that help us find elements on a web page. So locate the elements on the web page. And they come together with some kind of action. So you can perform actions on these locators. And those actions can be anything. You can erase text, you can enter something inside an input field, you can click on a button. So a vast amount of actions, I would say. And essentially, these are the core of UI testing. So locators, actions, we'll talk about later a bit later as well, are what makes, let's say, the foundation of UI automation testing. Now, one of the most common methods that you will see when we work with Selenium are find element and find elements. The find element one returns a web element object. So this is the class rather, or that contains everything related to the web elements. And if that element doesn't exist, or if you might have some wrong, let's say, parameter added, it will throw a specific exception. In addition to that, we have find elements, which returns a list. So this is when you maybe want to, let's say, take a search result view. So you have 12 results. You want to get all of them. You would need to use the find elements and then add the specific locator for it. So more often than not, you're probably going to be using find element when working with UI. It's a bit a rare occasion to use find elements, but again, you will definitely be seeing these a lot more moving into the future. Now, how do the locators work? We have, let's say, a good amount of already prepared locators, which we can just use and add parameters to them when we locate the web element that we want. One of them, and the most common one as well, is ID. So the simplest and best practice for automation testing for getting locators is by ID. If you have an ID, always try to make use of that element's ID. So don't bother too much about the others if it has an ID. And here we see we have this kind of input field. It has type text, and we see it has ID email. So this is the ID, the content actually of the ID that you will need to use when you want to get that element. And the way that you actually write it down in Selenium is you write find element. So we are searching for one. And then inside you will need to use by.id and then email. This by is also a class that contains the setters and getters for ID, class name, CSS selector. So all of them are noted inside it. You can actually also read on it a bit when we will be using it in the project. If you're more interested in all the capabilities, you can check it in the documentation. So this is something that you don't need to create on your own. And then you use the ID. Once we've done that, we are essentially done with trying to find our input field by its ID, which was the email. So what you do, you just locate the ID and then copy the contents inside the brackets of the ID field here and add quotation marks. Now, the second option is class name. This is, again, one of the more, let's say, prioritized ways to find an element. First is ID, then it's class name. Why is it second? Well, some elements can have multiple classes. So there's a case where you can have, so let's say the input here that we have required, and it could have required, search box, maybe input value. So it can have many classes. So in order to be as simple as possible, if it has more classes and you have an ID, you don't have to bother with the class because the ID is always going to be one element. And you see here, again, it is some kind of information provided in the HTML. So the class, it has this value. And when you try to find it, you use the command, again, either find element or elements. Here probably we have a lot more than one. You do by, again, and then class name, and you write inside the brackets whatever the value for the class is. Again, similar to the ID, you only change the parameter here. So instead of ID, we use class name. Moving forward, we have link text. This is, I would say, one of the more useful ones that you can find when you don't have access to classes or IDs. And why is it simple? Because it's usually when you have a link like this, so you see we have href to some projects domain, we have this Selenium project's value inside the link. And it's great because you can actually just copy the name of the element and then add it inside your locator. So as you notice, we do again, find element or elements by, and then you write link text. So instead of the class and ID, you just write link text, and then you copy the value that you have inside the link in the HTML. So you just copy paste the link text, and then you can perform any operation that you want. This is an action, and we'll talk a bit more about them later. And essentially, you just replace the class name or the ID, or whatever else is here, with link text and add whatever is inside the link in the HTML. So what the content is, not to be confused with the parameters here. Then you have partial link text, and you might be wondering, well, why would I use partial link text if I already have link text? Similar to link text is the same structure, so you only add partial link text here instead of link text, and then everything stays the same. The only difference here is when you work on some projects, developers might need to design specific, let's say, links that are going to be using some kind of random generated string in front of the text. So it might be something like, let's say 554780 all, and then submit button. This is maybe not the realist scenario, but there might be cases like this, and there usually are. And if there is no way to get that by the class, by the ID, or by XPath even, what you can do is you can actually do partial link text and just write the name of the part that is human readable. So we said submit button, so you can just write submit button and it will find it. It will see that it has a random string, but it will also locate what you need. It's very useful for those cases because, again, when we are writing the locators, it's very important for them to be easy to understand. So the more we add complicated code when writing a locator, the harder it is for us for when we need to change them, and the harder it is for somebody new who might come to the project and maybe even wonder what we were trying to achieve or what we were trying to select on the page. So again, it has its own use in certain cases. Then we move on to the tag name. So some of you might have experience with HTML, CSS. For those of you who don't, the tags essentially, basically they are elements that differentiate the content in an HTML. So for example, this TR is a tag. If you have a header, the H1 is a tag. It is similar to, let's say, Word. So in Word, you have H1 for header 1, or heading 1 rather. You have H2 for something else. So that is the tag. So tag tells you what is the style or attribute of an element. So this would be a table row, this would be a table column. So you see they have specifics to them. And the way that you can actually access them is just use, again, find element or find elements by, and then write tag name. And you can put any tag here. You can put input, you can put header 1 or H1, H2, H3, TD, TR. So you can use any tag. And this is usually not a common approach to find locators, simply because let's say you are on a page that has one header at the moment, heading 1, and you write by tag name H1, and yes, you will be able to get that element. It will work. But let's say after 3 months, the developer adds another header. So you have two header ones now. And when you run your code, what will happen is because you wrote H1 here, it will not know which element to select. So you have one H1 and you have another one. So it will not know what to do and it will fail. So it's best practice to avoid them unless you know that a specific page will never have the same tag. So basically, that's the gist of that. Then we have name, again, another very useful way to find elements. It comes out from this, let's say, parameter in the HTML name, and it's also common practice to use name whenever you have maybe more complex classes or no ID. So using name is quite straightforward. It's very useful. I've actually used it quite a bit in one of my projects to find locators because we had such a structure on the page, let's say. And you see everything is the same except you replace whatever is here, let's say class or ID, by name, and then you write the value inside it. Now, the last two types of locators are CSS and we'll see XPath. Now, CSS, again, for those who are not familiar, are styling sheets. So essentially, a CSS, it gives the page the layout. It gives components there, let's say, the way it gives them their image. So whether they have some shade or whether they're going to be highlighted or whether something's going to happen on hover and what color that hover effect will be, everything comes from that styling sheet. Similar to, again, to Word, Excel, where you can create something and make it bold, italic, underline it, move the text to the left, to the right. So again, it modifies the layout. And the great thing about Selenium is you can actually use those items, those styles, to your advantage and get the locator. The way that you can do it is you see we have here some style added inside an HTML, embedded style, and we have something like an input here, and then we have a form. So the way that you can approach this, if you have this type of code, you just write find element by CSS selector, you add it here, and then you use whatever value you have at your disposal. In this case, you can use input, or you can also use form. So either one will work, again, if there are not 5 style forms in the same page. If it's just a single one, both of these would work. And we will see some more advanced ways to get these CSS selectors in the DevTools exercise as well. Finally, we have XPath. Essentially, this is used for querying extensible markup language. You might have remember from our API testing that we did have similar views going into them. So you're essentially just going through all of these, let's say, nodes or items to locate whatever you need to locate. And then you have two ways to get the items. One way to get the items is to use the absolute path. And the absolute path is essentially basically going through every bit, every node in order to reach your item. So if you're trying to say, don't forget me this weekend, you will probably need to go to the HTML, then you're going to need to go to node, then you're going to go to body, and then you're going to go to the div in order to reach it. So it's a bit more difficult, and this is usually not practiced at all. So you don't want to get the absolute path because, again, it's not understandable. So if, let's say, I come to the project, I need to know what element this is, and I look at the code, it says HTML node body div. I probably won't know what I'm trying to reach. Is it some header? Is it maybe a list? Is it a search button? So it's not very intuitive. The more common approach for XPath is relative path. And we're going to write a few examples later so you can see how that works. And it basically does the same that this does, but more human readable. So you see we have, again, the same syntax by XPath is here. And then we have this body div. So we've cut down quite a bit. And the good thing here is you don't actually only need to write them like this. You can actually use something from the HTML. So you can maybe use input and then add class equals and then write the class name. So obviously that's a bit simplified, but this is the more common approach because you can get more, let's say, human readable values inside rather than the absolute path where you have to rely on the XML code. So the relative path is the approach that you will be using probably 99% of time when you would need to use XPath. The one thing to note here as well is regarding XPath. So when you'll be working on real projects, it's best to not use XPath as much as possible. So maybe not use it, but try to avoid it as much as possible. And why is that? XPath interacts directly and is dependent on everything that happens with the HTML. So for example, if you have a certain layout at a given moment and then the developers need to change the design even by a bit, all of this that you see here, node body div, could end up completely changed. And then you will have a very hard time trying to find that item that is not working. So it's always subject to change and it's not very constant. So if you have a dynamic page, which most pages usually are, it will always change and you'll have a very hard time trying to maintain your locators, especially if you have a lot of them. I've done this mistake in the past and I want to encourage you to try to use XPath as little as possible. So it makes life for testers a lot easier. And also it's a lot slower in comparison to using, for example, a CSS locator. Again, the best practice is to use ID, class name, link text, but in situations where you will have to make do with either CSS or XPath, always choose CSS. Again, it's a lot faster and it is not very, let's say, changeable when there are HTML changes. It is style dependent, but not related to the HTML itself. Okay. I think that is that for this section. Do you have any questions? I see Francesco wrote, was just going to ask this regarding XPath. Thank you. Yeah, no worries. Again, you can use it. I'm not saying never use XPath ever, but try to use it as little as possible. So maybe scenarios where there are a lot of items blocking the one that you want to reach. Again, very little scenarios. And it can actually cause some of your tests to fail when you use it very often, because again, performance is slower and that can cause flaky tests, as we call them, or tests that fail due to weights. So not ideal. Okay. All right. I see some people are typing in the chat. I'll give it a minute. I see Bino wrote, have you had any blocker when using any of these locators? That's a very interesting question, Bino. Thank you. I've had the most headaches, I would say, with XPath. That's why I try to, after after years of experience, I'm trying to promote to people to avoid using it. We essentially, when we were starting out at one of my earlier projects, we were using XPath, I would say 60% of the time. So we couldn't get it by ID, class name, and link text. And we would never try to use a CSS selector because I think for beginners, it's also tricky to learn it, but it's definitely worth it. And what we did was the clients actually requested to have changes on all of the CTAs on their page. So every CTA needed to have some changes applied on each page. And from the 60% of locators, we had to change 50% of them. So it was a disaster. So we had to go one by one, find each element that we were working with. Luckily, we had, let's say, some wordings that helped us find them a bit easier, but it was a catastrophe, and we needed probably about 2 weeks to change everything and make sure it works. And I'm counting like each and every day working extensively to cover all of them. Again, it's 50 something tests, and you have these locators which are expat. So again, try to avoid them as much as possible. I see Francesco wrote, how did you solve it? Would you instead? Yeah, that was it. We had to manually go through each one and change it because we actually really much needed all of them. So, and then we basically changed around 50 of those, not 50, maybe from those that we changed, about 50% were CSS selectors. We added partial link text. We also used some other locators, some tags that we created on our own. But again, it took a lot of time to get there. Yeah. So I would say the most headaches come from expat. So, all right. Okay. If there are no questions, I think because we have a bit more talking to do in some of the next sections, we can do the break now. And yeah, no worries. And yeah, Jumana, you can take it away and we can continue later
Thank
on.
you so much. You know the drill, everyone. Enjoy your break. You.
Thank you. I threw that one, I guess. Congrats, Jordan. Alrighty. Let's continue on where we left off, everyone. I'm gonna share my screen now. And I think you should be able to see it. Okay, so we talked a bit about basic locators, let's say, and now we're going to look into some additional practices and techniques that we can actually use and quite often actually use when using and trying to find web elements. Now, it's basically, you will also see it even on some of the practice pages that we will look at. Locating elements is a bit more trickier than it sounds. You're not always going to have an ID, a class, a link text even in some cases, so you won't be able to find it because probably 6 elements will have the same, let's say, name. So you will need to have something in your, let's say, QA bag of tricks to be able to work around them. So here we see we have this class name, which has 3 randomly generated, let's say, class values. And if we were to try to do this, we could probably, let's say, access the element that we see, but let's say this is something dynamic. So this could be the case that it changes. So at this moment, it's this combination of digits. It could be some other after 2 weeks, a day, even a month. So we are not essentially getting something of value. So it's not understandable what it is. And also it could be a random GUID that can change over time. So in order to be able to avoid this and to make sure that we have some kind of both readable and feasible locator added, we have this thing called wildcard operators, which you usually use with a CSS selector, and we're going to take a look into some of those. Some of you might have seen these if you have ever worked a bit with operating systems and something, so you might be familiar with them, but no issue. I mean, these are usually very rarely known. So once you go into testing, you're gonna definitely use them plenty. So the first one is the $sign. And what does this do? This one is basically ends with. So it isolates the last part of a string. So for example, we have this class. So again, this is something randomly generated, like we mentioned before. And then we have send button. So if you notice, send button is basically telling us, giving us information on what the locator is. So if we want to make use of it, what we can actually do is call the class, and then add dollar equals, and then write the ending string that we want to use. So this ends in send button. You can also add the underscore if you want, but it's not really necessary. And you essentially write send button. And once you do this, the element will locate the, let's say, the locator will locate the element that has a class that ends with the send button. So that's what it's going to do. So the dollar locates an ending of a string, essentially. And here's how it will probably look like if you were to use it within Selenium directly. So you would use find element by CSS selector. And once you do that, you open up the brackets and you do button here. So this bit here, button, that you see, depends on where you're locating the element. So if it's a button, you will write button. If it is an input field, so let's say a username input field, you will write input. If it's a link, you will add a. So it depends on what kind of element it is. So it's not only for buttons, is my point. And then you just follow this example here. So open the straight brackets, you add class, you add the wildcard symbol, and then you add the name that you want to be found using this wildcard. So the ending of the string, which is this one. So this is one way that you can do this. Then we have starts with, and it's this little arrow up symbol. Um, this one isolates the first part of a string name. So this one was for the ending, the dollar sign, and then the arrow up isolates the beginning. So if we have, let's say send button is at the beginning here, and this random string is here, if you want to access send button and it's the other way around, as we see here, you will be using the up arrow. We also have an example here. So you see we have find element by CSS selector once again, and then notice that we have a different element type. So now it's an input. This was a button, and now we're looking for an input. Again, it can be a link, it can be a row in a table. So whatever it is, you just need to note it down. So TRTD, it could be any of those. And then, similar as before, you open the straight brackets, you write, in this case, we're using the ID, then you write the wildcard symbol, which is the arrow up, and then you try to find an element that starts with 2 tab. So you essentially will find the element that starts with this specific string here. And this is how it actually looks on the page. So you see it has 2 tab and then search text box. It will locate it due to this being sent with this wildcard elements. Finally, we move to the star, which is contains. And what does this do? This basically locates any word within a string. So if you have a longer text that says primary search text results, let's say, and you want to find it by something simplified, so you don't want to write the entire name in a line of code, you can actually use this star. So you see the example here, we have input ID is 2 tab search text box. Now we probably don't want to write this because again, it is understandable what it is, but there's so many words which are combined one next to the other that at first glance it's not very neat, let's say, and it takes up a lot more lines than it should. So what we can do is we can again write find element by selector. And then once we add this section here, we add the contains symbol, which is the star. And after we add that, we just write whichever string we want to find from the middle. In this case is search text, as you can see here. You can also add tab search if it's something related to the tabs. If it makes more sense, you can write tab search here. So whatever makes more sense to you and whatever you find more readable. So essentially, that's the idea of these three. And I will highly recommend when exercising after the hands-on lecture as well, you try to play around with them because again, it is the issue that I mentioned earlier about the XPath. This is one of the workarounds that we did. So we essentially use these wildcards in combination with some attributes that we had with the elements. And then we created similar, let's say, locators for our elements, which again, were a lot more readable, were constant. We didn't have to fix them all the time. So these three wildcard symbols are very much useful and important. Moving on, we have nth child. And this is something that is not very much practice, but if you need it for specific comparisons, you'll probably need to locate it as well. And what does endChild mean? So if you see here, we have this little list, right? So we have this container, div container, and we have elements inside it. And if we want to locate this element, and we see they all are the same, so all of them are a link, all of them have the same URL, right? This empty string, let's say, and we can't really locate them if we try to use a link, if we try to use the if we try to use xpath, so it's basically the same thing all the time. So what we can do is we can, again, use the CSS selector and then do div ID. We write the ID, which is example wrapper. So this is the ID of the element that contains the child. And then we do what is the tag, which is an A, and then we write nth child and the number of which we want to access. So we see is the third one, we write 3. So this is essentially when you would ever want to use nth child. So you write the name of the parent item. Again, the div is the parent of all of them, so you need to use that one. And then specify, based on the tag, which child you want to use. So if it's a nth child 3, it will be the third one. You can use the second one by writing 2. Let's say if it's a scenario where it's not links, it's actually only input fields, you will need to write here instead of a input. Again, it changes similar to the other examples. This can be a button, it can be an input, it can be a link. It depends on the context, but this is essentially the bit you need to add after the ID or the class or whatever you'll use to find the element, which is the parent, to find the end item. And then you also have end of type. This is basically similar to what we saw here, but this only specifies elements of a specific type. So here, the nth child, you can see it can be basically any child element of the parent one, where in this case, we can actually just only specify of the specific type. So div nth of type and then 3. So this basically tells us we want to say we want to use the elements within the same type. So this will probably just give us the locate this text, which we can see here because these are all divs. If in case we wrote 3 and we have something here that is, let's say, a link, it will avoid it. So you're not going to see that one because it doesn't count. It's not of type div. So you won't directly specifying that is going to be related to that. Now, one additional locator that I want to show you all, it's not really a locator, but it is in a way something that you can actually use for some specific elements. That is the JavaScript executor. It's more related to actions, but it's mostly used when you have specific locators that kind of block you from doing something related to the page. And the way it looks like is I have a snippet here that we can see. Hopefully you can see it. This is called a JavaScript executor. And what it does, it basically injects JavaScript commands in the browser. So it is something that you have as an option. And it's good if you want to do a bit more reading on this as well. However, it should not be similar to XPath overused. So this is not something that simulates real user behavior. It is something that you need to use in certain scenarios when you have some locators that are making issues for the code. Only in those cases, basically. So you see, you just declare it as an object. It is of type executor and driver, and then you just use it as such. So you javascript.execute script, and then you write whatever script you need to execute. You see here we have Windows scroll by 0500. The way that you can check if your script works also is you can just copy this and you can paste it in a console on the web. I will also show this when we work with DevTools, but this is a sort of locator action based item that you can also have in mind, but remember, you don't need to overuse and you should not overuse it because it's not realistic, but it's helpful. So whenever you are on a page, you have, for example, let's say I'm going to open the Amazon page. Let's say you have some kind of pop-up and you can't select the home storage item here. It's simpler to just add a JavaScript that will remove anything in front of it and select it for you. But again, it's not something that is mandatory to use. You can have other workarounds, but it's good for people to know it. So it might come in handy in specific situations, but again, similar to expat, I would recommend using it as little as possible and only when necessary. Okay, do you have any questions so far regarding the locators? Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move to the next bit. Okay, using DevTools to find elements. Now, when you will be working with specifically with UI tests, you're going to use DevTools a lot. It is going to be your best friend, and you're essentially going to make most of your tests and locators using it. Some of you might have used it. I will mention again. You might have seen DevTools even by accident sometimes, because I think you can click F12 or some key. I don't remember the hotkey. Don't take it with a grain of salt. But you might have pressed it by accident. It opens a tab. You see a lot of HTML, CSS, a lot of code, networking, and that is basically the DevTools. So that is what you will use most of the time when you will be trying to construct locators, especially, and some scenarios for your tests. Now, a good tip here is always use incognito, and that is also something I very much would recommend because basically, when you want to write something from the beginning, you could have some things that are cached from your personal browsing history, and you don't want to have all of that data when you're trying to just specifically focus on the page where you want to test. And also, when you're using incognito, you're probably not going to have maybe some leftover cached data from previous releases, which again makes it might have some changes, let's say, to elements that are unforeseen or that you were supposed to apply to your test and you didn't. So incognito is the safest bet to use DevTools. Now, how to open DevTools? You can open any page, whichever page you want. The way I do it, you right click on the page and you have inspect here at the bottom. Just click inspect, and this is what you're going to see. And once you have this, you can, I usually have it docked at the bottom, as you can see. You can, if you click on the three dots here, you can dock it on the side, you can dock it on top, you can dock it however you find it more comfortable for working. For me, it is at the bottom usually. And then you'll see plenty of options that you can play around with here on the DevTools. You have styles on the side, you have the HTML here, console sources. So you have all of these options available, and we'll go a bit through them in this lesson. Now, we can see now this is the Amazon homepage. When you open this page, we're going to basically, before we open the page, we're going to see how we can locate all of these elements within it. So how the testing process works in these scenarios is the following. So let's say we need to, I don't know, use a test to see if the search can find a valid input terms results. So now, in order for me to use the search bar, I would probably need to find a locator, assign a locator to it in my code. So what you do, and what you can actually, what I usually do most of the time, is you select the little arrow here, which is right above the HTML. You can see it is like a diagonal upwards left arrow. When you click it, you're going to notice it turns blue and does all this highlighting here. And then you just hover over the element that you're interested in this case, the search box, which we are, and you can click here. And you notice inside here at the bottom, the element that you click is highlighted blue. So this means that we are currently observing this element. And if you want to create a locator for it, you have everything you need here. You have an ID, you have a value name, you have class, you have all of these options which you can choose. Luckily, this has plenty, so you can just use the ID at this moment. And if you want to make sure that this is the correct element that you're looking for, if you want to make sure that this is the only ID that is used in an element, you can actually copy it. And then you can also hit Control Find, so Control F, And if you do hashtag and paste this, you see we have two results. So one is somewhere in the script and the other is for the ID of the search bar. So meaning we only have one ID like this, and we can perfectly use the ID for this element. If there is a case where we enter the ID and then we see like 5 results, then definitely it is a no-go to use the ID for this specific element. So that is basically, in short, how you can look through some other elements. If you want to select something else, we can actually go ahead, click on Prime Video here, and we notice that Prime Video is a child item of a list. It is a link, it has a class, it has some data type, some value. So essentially, the way you go about it is you select the blue arrow and then select whichever item you want to use to add to your tests. We can also do here the drop down. You see it as a span. Inside it we have a div, another span. So again, this differs from element to element, and we will be doing this a lot as well in the exercises next lesson. But this is, let's say, the common way to find your elements. Now, we also mentioned a bit if you want to make sure that this is the only class with that name or the only ID, if you want to check whether the ID exists somewhere else on the page, as I mentioned, you copy the name from the ID and you add a hashtag. So hashtag is another way of saying ID in CSS, and dot is another way of saying this is a class. So this is what you can use to search to see if they appear in other places. If you do this for the class, it will search for the class inside the element. And again, this is just to double check if this repeats. And it's a good practice because, again, you don't want to use locators that have an ID which is presented in 5 elements. You want to use them if it's only present once, so that the tests can be up and running without any issues. Now, the best sellers, next is the best sellers. This is like a link that we selected a bit before. And essentially we have here, these are the links that we're referring to. Now, the best sellers is currently not up, but we can, as I mentioned, go through some of them. And we see we have some kind of link. We have this item that we have here selected, covered in blue. And what we can do, and you will notice this option, is actually check how we can select the element here. So now I'm currently just having an overview of what the element has. And what I can do is if you're on the element, so currently I selected the element, the arrow first, you can right click it and you will notice all of these options open up. Add attribute, edit attribute, cut, copy, hide, force state, so on and so forth. If you hover over copy, you will see multiple things. Copy element is just, yes, the HTML. Copy outer HTML, so something that's outside this HTML, which we can see here, so not the text within it. Then we have copy selector, we have copy JavaScript path, we have copy styles, copy XPath, and copy full path. So you see we have all of these options here. The selector copies the CSS selector, and then you have the XPath that copies the XPath and the full path, the absolute. So you have all of these options here. And as a rule of thumb, I usually recommend not using them because you would probably need to modify whatever you copy here for your code, especially if you're just going to go for a JS path or an outer HTML. So you're most often than not going to need to modify it. And we can do that with the copy selector. So if I click copy selector, and let's say I open this notepad, let's add it here at the bottom. So this is what I'll see. And when you see this, you will need to do a bit of modification in order to be able to reach this item using the selector. Because when you see this, you can technically copy paste this inside the item name in parentheses, but it doesn't follow clean code practices. So this is not something that you want to leave inside the code for you or for others that would probably need to work on it. So the way that we can actually do this is, you see, we have the selector that we copied, and there are two ways that we can do it. First one is take whatever we got. So let's say this is whatever we got. We have the ID, and then we have the position of the child element. and we can just wrap it around in similar to what we did before. So we construct a selector which has a div element, then the div we have the ID, which is the navx shop, and then we point from that ID to use that child element. So we're essentially just making this selector a bit more readable. However, uh, because this again, it is simplified from what we had here, it's still not as intuitive as it should be. So it should, again, should tell us more information than just that it's a navigation item from the shop. So the better item would be to see the link. So the link there probably contains bestsellers. In our case, we can open the link here. So you see it has gold box. We can also check if gold box is present on other items as well. I can write gold box here. We have only one link, as you can see, because these are some other contents which are not located into that element. And because that is the case, and it is a specific element, let's say, you can actually do, again, a CSS selector, and you do A, then href, the dollar equals bestsellers, or in this case, gold box. Again, so this probably you can add more items to it. You don't have to specify this, but for the bestsellers case, you can use the wildcard symbol for adding the last string, which is bestsellers, to it. And this will already be, let's say, a more better way of representing the item that you would like to use. On the other hand, uh, the other option that we have is, again, if we have no duplicates, if this is the only link text that we can find on the page, bestsellers, you can always go with the simplest locator, which is just using link text, one that is already created for us. So you just use find element by link text and then enter bestsellers. So remember, this is the option if we know that we have multiple bestseller link text, so we want to specify something within the link in this case, or something related to the item itself. But if we have only one bestsellers item on the page, like in this case, you can just simply write link text bestsellers, and that would be that. Do you have any questions so far for this bit? Okay, before we move on, I wanted to also show you all what is the most you're going to be using the DevTools to construct. And I want to do one or two examples with XPath. Again, I know I propagated a bit that it should not be as used as often, but I think this is something that I always wanted to, in a way, know before I started automation testing, because again, you will have situations where you need to use it. So I'm going to use one or two examples to just show you how you can construct, in a way, your own XPath. So I'm going to go back to the Amazon page. Now, to construct an XPath, you don't use this elements window here. You actually use the console. So if you open the console here, you will probably see something like this, and it depends on the page you're going to be at. And the way that you can actually construct the XPath is, first you need to add a dollar. We're going to add an X. So $X. So this is the starting. This indicates that we're starting and looking for something specific in the markup language. So that's why it's $X. And then you're going to open a parenthesis, bracket actually. And once you open the bracket, you need to add a single quote. You already see some of the examples, but I'm gonna try to do it step by step. And once you do that, you need to do the two dashes. As if you remember, so these two dashes were from the relative path that we talked in the previous session. So you can just add the two dashes like this, and then we will need to see what element we are looking for. So now, for practice sake, let's just say we're looking for some of the items here. So let's imagine we cannot actually access them. So what you can actually do in order to see how you can find it, you go into the item, like I did, like you just click the arrow here, select the item, and we see that this is a link, which is great. We don't need to overthink it. We have a link, and then for that link, we have this class. Okay, so you go back to the console, and you say, okay, so I know that the tag I have is a link, so I'm just gonna add a in front. And then you're going to open the square brackets, which is, again, this is all following the relative path of an XPath expression. And then you use at, and then because we said we're going to use the class, you just write class, and then you write equals. Let me just write this, nav dash a. And once you do that, you just close the bracket, close the quotation, and then you close the entire bracket. So this is one way in which you can construct an XPath. And once you do that, if everything is correct, so if you do have elements that have, let's say, this class that we used, you should see under your text something like this. So it says it has two items. You see that here I have a.nava and then a.nava, so I have two items. And if you click enter, you should be able to open the drop down here and just select which item. So if I click this, I will be navigated to this element. And if I click on this one, I will be taken to another one. So obviously you note that there are two items here and I can play around with them. So based on what we can see here. Another way which you can actually that you can actually do this is you can, again, we'll go AX, we're gonna open the bracket. So the beginning is always the same. You don't need to think too much about this bit. And what we can do now is we can say, let's say, um, let's say I'm gonna go the home storage item. So let me do this item. Or actually, let's take something that has text. I'm gonna do this. So we're gonna take another one of the link items. Yes, it has text. Wonderful. So we're gonna try to do this, and then we're gonna do a. So again, this is a link. Again, if I do another, if you select a field where you can add input, you can just do this. So this is basically meant for any attribute. So I'm gonna add the a. And now what I can do, let's say that I don't have the option to use the class. So that's why I'm using XPath. I can't use ID, I can't use class, I can't use link specific text or something like that. So I'm not able to do this. So one thing you can do is you can actually just write contains and then you do text and then you write down the text today's deals. I think it was the text. It's probably not going to be, might show some issues because it might read there we go. See if, yeah, it's going to be, I have a missing bracket. So this is because of this. And now it should see, yeah, this is because some of the wordings that I have. But okay, but basically what you can do is you can actually use a contains text expression. And what is the idea with this? So let's give it an let's say again, I can't use the class, the ID, so on and so forth. You can always try to check if some item that is of a type link contains the following text. So you can see I had some text added here. Currently, I do have the issue with not being able to show it, but again, uh, if you ever wonder how you can construct and write down some similarities to this, I will also link it after the lecture. You can always try checking out some documentation. It also has some information on how you can construct specific XPaths. So you don't need to remember these by heart. So these are, again, you're not expected to remember these scenarios by heart. And again, you should not be using them as often as possible. But if you do come into this case, you can always see what your capabilities and options are and note them down into the console like so. And if that element exists, it will show you the answer there. If it doesn't, it's just going to give you the element does not exist or that you would need to try another way. Do you have any questions? I see Susan wrote, could you please copy and paste it in the chat here? Yep, of course. I will copy the first one. So let me just paste it here. There we go. Again, you might need to when you're trying to do these XPath expressions, again, you can just use some documentation to see what options you have to add. Again, even I don't remember all of them by heart. It all depends on how often I am using him at the moment. There's also options to add child elements, to select a child element actually, and you can write them here. But again, this should only be situational. So when you can't absolutely select anything else. Yeah, I think, Susan, it won't allow you on Amazon. I believe you can't copy paste it, so it's best to just rewrite it. I think they have some like security things going on Amazon. Yeah, scam warning, take care when pasting things you don't understand. Yeah, that's on Amazon and most, let's say, big vendor pages. You can try to do it on Sauce Demo if you want. So I will be showing that one on the next lecture. So you can use the one that we used in previous lectures for testing purposes. So here you should not have any issues when you try to use XPath and copy paste anything. But this is something related to Amazon for the copy pasting in the console. So again, it's nothing major, but they have their own security protocols. So even I can't copy paste it myself. Okay. I don't see any other questions, so I will move on to the next section. Okay, Selenium actions and weights. Now, another big part, aside from the locators, is the actions and the weights. So once we have the elements that we want to be interacting with, we would need to be able to use them to perform the actions that a user would do. Now, um, we already talked a bit, you actually saw some assertions in TestNG. In order to get to those, we will also need to use specific actions that we perform with our locators and also create methods using them. Now, there is a really big amount of actions that you can use in Selenium. Some of them are listed here. So we have click, we have double click, click and hold, drag and drop, send keys, pause. And if you want to research more about them, or if you don't want to remember everything by heart, you can open, we also have the link here added by the content team, and you can actually find it in the documentation. So if you go here, you can find all the methods. So you can have build, click, click, click and hold context, and it also tells you what you need to add inside in order for it to work. You see get action duration, get sequences, key down. This is if you want to select a specific key. So if you want to select enter, you can use key down. Key up if you maybe want to go some use like page up and something similar. Move by offset, move to element. So again, there is a ton of actions, and you use them in connection with the locators that we talked about. So this is essentially the most used documentation that you will be using for most tests, because again, you're not expected to remember each and every one of them by heart. It is basically this is your, let's say, pool of researching when you have specific actions for which one is the best to use with the locators in your specific test script. Now, aside from the actions, another very important part, I would say, from Selenium is waiters. Now, what are waiters? Waiters are essentially these commands that tell the element, or rather the driver, to wait for specific conditions to happen before an element is visible, or wait for amount of time so an element is visible, so on and so forth. So essentially, they just give the driver the information to essentially wait for an action to happen or something to appear, for example, a specific locator. Now, what are the types of weights? We have three types. We have implicit, explicit, and fluid weights. Now, I'm going to go into detail about all of them. What's important here to note is which one of them should be practiced. Now, implicit weight are basically, in a way, global settings that give the elements a specific type to load. So you can see here we have driver.manage timeouts, and then implicitly wait duration of X amount of seconds. Now, these implicit waits are useful when you're trying to debug something. So if you're trying to see what happens and you want to give more time for an element to appear and why it fails, but it's very much a practice to avoid them. Because if you add these implicit waits for the driver to wait when there is execution happening, you will come into a scenario where it could wait a lot more time than it needs to. Sometimes you can also have failing tests because of these implicit waits because they're applied to multiple elements. And if you have an implicit wait for all of them, uh, let's say 10 seconds, first the test suite will take a lot more time than it's needed. And second, you'll probably have even failing tests because they might even time out if, let's say, that element takes a tad more time to load than you implicitly stated it needs to. Then we have explicit waits. These basically loop over an element until a condition is met, as stated here. So what does that mean? So as you can see from the code here, we have the wait, and then it says WebDriver wait until reveal.isDisplayed. So this says basically go to the element, wait for it until its condition is met, until it is displayed, until visible, until hidden. So explicit waits wait until a specific action happens. And you're basically the one who states what that action is. So this is the most widely used waiter, I would say, and this should be the common wait that you use for scenarios. So if you notice that, let's say you're opening the Amazon search page and it takes maybe additional 3 seconds to load all results, you would want to say, okay, wait until elements are visible, or in this case, the search result view. So you want to give it enough time as it needs so it can be displayed. So that is the explicit wait. And again, this is the common practice. This is the most common wait that you want to use in the projects because again, it is not something that that will affect all of your components. So this is not something you set as a timer for all components. It is specific and it waits on a condition. So it doesn't just give a given period of time and it waits during execution. The most, I would say, advanced and the last bit and type of weights is the fluent weight. And how does the fluent weight work? Well, um, basically, a fluent weight is something that so it has some kind of duration, and in that duration, the fluent weight polls for the element. What does poll mean? So it checks whether that element in that period of time has done the action or has appeared or has been hidden. Or has executed some kind of action. So the difference between this and the explicit wait is essentially this wait waits for a specific timer, and in that timer, each amount of time, let's say here it says 300 milliseconds, each 300 milliseconds, it's going to try to interact with that element. So let's say again, we're loading the page and we want to select a filter, and we know that the filter might take 5 seconds to load. You're going to say, okay, wait for 5 seconds, but each 500 milliseconds, try to interact with them. So what this is going to do when your test reaches the filters is going to try every 500 milliseconds to see and interact with the filters because they may appear in 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, you don't know. And each time it will try to poll. So after 500 milliseconds pass, it will try again to see if it exists. 500 milliseconds, again, it will try again until the 5-second mark is reached. So this is essentially what a fluent wait does. And this one should be used in really, I would say, niche edge cases. I would give an example, again, related to filters. We had these sort of sticky notes that appeared on top of filters. So if you select a filter, let's say I select this filter here, it takes a few seconds for an item to appear above it. And the time was a bit arbitrary, so it could appear in 2 seconds and 5, but we knew what was the span. So what we did was when we select the filter, so we select, let's say volcanic science, and we need to wait and verify that the sticky note appears here, that this filter is selected. So we added a polling of 5 seconds. So we said here at 5 seconds and try to see if it appears each 500 milliseconds. So that was the way that we thought was ideal. And what happened was when the test is executed, it will try to poll. Sometimes it would get it in 2 seconds, sometimes in 3, sometimes 3.5, 4. And essentially, we only used it for that scenario. Because again, this is a bit more complex. It adds a bit more code. It adds a bit of an implicit flavor to the weighting, which of course, we would try to avoid as much as possible, but it is useful for these edge cases where the explicit weight might fail because it waits for the element to be displayed, but that element might take a bit more than expected. And it is not failing, it is just the way the component works. So it is useful in specific scenarios. However, I will not I recommend you try to overuse it. So only do it for specific must-need scenarios. Do we have any questions so far from the actions and waiters? I see there was some discussion for the locators. All right, I see Valentina wrote hack the systems. A very nice, neat way of providing that. All right, that's a nice hack. All right. Any questions regarding the waiters or the actions? All right. I think that we can move to the behavior-driven development bit before we go to the break. Okay. So, what is behavior-driven development? So, um, basically, behavior-driven development was added as an option, especially for automation testing, so that there is, let's say, a more clear picture of what we are testing, not only for us and for developers, but for the clients, for the project manager, for the stakeholders, so that everybody can get an idea of what we're trying to cover with our automation tests. So basically, the behavior-driven development is based on a methodology known as Gherkin, and that basically states that you have some scenario and you want to describe the scenario using the syntax given, when, and then. So given, when, then is the Gherkin methodology. And how does the Gherkin methodology work? Some of you might have heard it, some of you may have not. The way that it works is you basically, I'm just going to open a new file here. You basically, instead of writing when I'm on a page, I should, let's say, see the content. So instead of writing this and presenting it to somebody with a line along with the code that you have, Gherkin promotes the following syntax. You say, given the user is on the landing page, and then you say, when the user selects an item from the drop-down menu, then the user should see the menu items, let's say. So this is how the Gherkin syntax works. So you want to use given, when, and then to start off your steps. So all of the steps that you want to mention, you want to start with one of these, and as well. There's also the option to start with and. So we say when the user selects an item from the dropdown and the user hovers over it, let's say. This is not important to the scenario, but so you can use all of these given, when, and then to create your test steps. Now, why are we mentioning this only now and not when creating test cases? Well, this is because BDD and Gherkin go hand in hand with automation testing, especially when working with UI test tools like Selenium. So in Java, the BDD is supported with another framework, which is called Cucumber. Some of you might have heard of Cucumber, and it provides the ability to write this human readable syntax, so this text in a way, from our side. And then what it does, it links it to Selenium. So it basically connects it to our test, to our code. So we can see here, this is essentially what the syntax is that we just discussed about. And this is how it will look inside the code. So you have this scenario bit, and you're essentially stating what the scenario is. So what does it do? And then you write given, and then you write I launch a Chrome web browser and navigate to Amazon.com. When I type water filter into the search bar and I click on the search icon, then I should see a list of results relevant to that. So you see you have this given, when, and then syntax. And once you've constructed this, so this is a separate file. You don't need to write any code here. You can just write the Greeking syntax here. You need to connect it to code. And how do you connect it to code? Well, you just use, if you scroll down a bit here, you go into where your tests are. So this, imagine these are relevant tests now. You go into the class where you have your tests, and all you need to do is you just need to import. So you need to import the Cucumber library. And once you do it, you just use add given, and you write the scenario for the given step. Then you write at when, you use the when step of the scenario. You do then, and then you write the then step. And what this does, it essentially binds, so it binds whatever you wrote here or whatever you wrote in this scenario, so it depends on what scenario you're using, and it binds it to that step. So to open Firefox and launch the application. So you see, we have somewhere in our Cucumber file, open the Firefox and launch the application. So given the user opens the Firefox and launches the application, and we're binding it to the method that executes that test. So you see here, this is what is supposed to happen. And when somebody who might not have such technical knowledge, let's say, wants to verify what we're testing, they can just go into the test scripts and just see, okay, so I see here you've written given user is opening the browser, and I see that you're actually covering it in this test here. Then I see that you're entering the username and password, testing the login in this scenario, and then you're resetting the credentials in the third one, and they immediately know that they will be covered in the automation because again, as human readable, it relates to whatever we are doing in the test script below it. So again, in a nutshell, you create a separate file. Usually it's called a feature file. It is different for different frameworks. So for Cucumber, for SpecFlow in C#, there are many variations. And there you just write your test, essentially just writing the test case with the steps, but you just use given, when, and then. And once you do that, once you have the file completed, you just go into your code class, so the one that you use for the tests, and you just bind them by adding this at given, and then you write the essentially the step that you're going to be testing with the method here. All right. And essentially that's, I would say, the gist of it. So you have a connection between human readable steps and your tests. So you're kind of like just giving an extra layer of explanation. And I would say it is very useful for clarity, especially for stakeholders and for project managers, because again, they might not always be from the technical background, but it's also good to take it with a grain of salt when using it on bigger projects. Because if you have BDD implemented in a project, let's say again, you have over 100 tests, it comes very difficult to maintain both the test steps and also to maintain the tests themselves. So if you're constructing test cases separately, let's say in Jira, and you also write the test steps in the BDD framework in Cucumber, and also you're writing your test executed scripts, it could come a bit difficult to maintain everything. So this is mostly used in smaller scale projects where it just gives us the benefit of having more clarity on how everything works. Do we have any questions regarding the BDD part? I would add on to this that, again, most projects don't really use BDD for testing at this point. I have worked on one that did, one that used it and then stopped using it because the test became way too much to handle with it. And like I say, it's very neat, it's very tidy, it's very informative, but it doesn't really change too much performance-wise if you don't have it. So it's not very noticeable if you do not use it. However, again, it gives more clarity to people who are maybe not that tech savvy and want to get more information from the tests. Okay. If there are no other questions for this, I think we can go ahead and have the last break and yeah, continue when we finish with that.
Okay, thank you so much, Angelo. Enjoy your 10-minute break, everyone.
Okay, let's move on with the last bit of content that we have. Okay, so we finished with behavior-driven development, last bit, and now we're moving to CI/CD test integration and YAML files. We'll see what those are. So we've already touched a bit about the topic of DevOps and CI/CD in some of the first lectures, uh, and this is where it really comes into play. So it's really tied to automation testing when we're talking about the QA sphere in general. Because what is CI/CD? That's short for continuous integration and continuous development or delivery. Now, what is the idea? The idea is that there is this process that automatically and quite frequently actually uh, uploads code changes into a shared repository. So for example, you have some kind of changes to the test that you made, and in order for that to be smooth, automated, smooth, automated, and go without any additional issues, you probably would need to implement such continuous integration practices. Then we have the delivery, which is a bit different, but is for similar uses, which is divided into delivery and deployment. So what is the idea? The delivery stops short of production deployment, and the continuous deployment releases updates in production environment. So one stops before the production deployment and the other finishes from where it goes. And what is the idea? So let me give you a bit of a clearer picture of what happens. So you have code, right? So let's do it like this. So you have development code, something that's related to the page, and when the changes are made, everything is pushed from the development, the pipeline is started, and what happened is this code is pushed to some repository that you're using for different environments. Then after that code is pushed, you have your tests, which you have already completed, that are also applied after the development code is pushed. So it happens like this. You have the development code, it is pushed, it triggers the automation test scripts, they are run. If everything is okay, this can go to the next environment. So this can be moved forward into, let's say, staging. There, again, the same process repeats. It is automated. So the code is there, it's executed, the tests are executed to check if everything is all right. If all of them pass, everything goes to production. If not, you would need to probably rework something and see what is causing the issues. So essentially, CI/CD is this, let's say, concept that is meant to make the job easier for testers and developers, both in merging and adding code and automatically checking it one against the other. So you don't have to manually, after each change that the developer does, have to kind of run a script, for example, in PowerShell to check those changes against any environment. Again, this is just to make your life easier. And when you're beginners, you will not really have a lot to do with CI/CD because this is a more advanced concept. So probably the most that you can get at the early stages is just by pushing your code to a repository, and that will be the end of it there. A very popular CI/CD platform is Jenkins, and it's widely used with Java as well. And other ones are GitHub Actions. You also have AWS Code Pipeline, Travis CI, Azure Pipelines. So all of them follow a similar trend. And once you get more into working on any type of project, really, you will see that they're quite similar. They're maybe more straightforward than they seem, and also that they definitely make the entire process smoother and easier in terms of development and testing. Now, one more thing that goes hand in hand with CI/CD, and you might actually see this very often, even maybe when you're doing some practice projects as well, is YAML, or rather YAML files. These are basically human readable files, so they're quite straightforward and constructed. And what are they used for? They're basically used to write down everything you need for your project. So when you're working, if you remember with some of the other homeworks that you might have had, you have all of these items that you need to import. You have, like, for example, if you want to use strings, you're probably going to need to import a library for that. If you want to use random numbers, or a random number generator, you're going to need some kind of math library. And so in order for you to not have the need to add this all to separate environments, to all other tests and everything like that, you use this YAML file and you essentially write down everything that is necessary there. It is mostly used for CI/CD pipelines, and we're going to see an example here. So you see all of this data here. Now, it might look like a bit too much and a bit of a, let's say, unknown pool. But what we can see here is we have some trigger. Does it have some kind of trigger? This trigger actually be um, can actually be, let's say, something that causes the test to run after a specific deployment. So you can add trigger to be, I don't know, maybe after after a new feature is added, the tests are automatically triggered and they check all the smoke scenarios. So this could be set up as that. You have at which stages it can be performed, what jobs, tasks. So all of this information, again, it's not something that you need to focus a bit too much as early on as now. But it is good to know because these YAML files, again, are used in CI/CD pipelines. So they, as you see, have all of the options here noted, like which JDK version we have, may have an option, so you don't have to go up into the pipeline and set them all up for each release. So you have the YAML file, you just change everything that needs to be changed inside. So if you update some packages, this usually updates itself as well when you do some specific package installations. But again, it's good to keep it in mind and know that if anything ever happens, let's say in the CI/CD, you have any issue regarding versions and such, you can always open YAML file and make sure that everything is in order there, because most issues that usually come out of a deployment are related to such files. And one thing I would also note here is you might notice that is just a YML. This abbreviation is yet another markup language, if you're interested to know a bit more about that. So that's basically the gist of it. So you have CI/CD, which allows us to basically have all the process of pushing, merging, and running code automated. And then we have the YAML files, which are the configuration. So this is the configuration for our code, what needs to be installed, and what and when is the code run, given our project needs, of course. Do we have any questions regarding these two concepts? Again, these are a bit more advanced, and beginners are not expected to do a lot of editing, or rather at all any editing, and run tests and pipelines, but it's good to keep it in mind. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we're gonna move to one of the last content lecture part, which is the Selenium practices to avoid. Now, we saw some, and we discussed also some things that we should avoid previously as well during the lecture. However, when working with Selenium, due to its vast size and amount of locators, actions, waiters, everything that can be actually used to construct tests, there's obviously things that heavily impact how your tests will be run and executed, performance-wise, of course, if you do not avoid some specifics. And we're going to discuss a bit about this in detail right now. One of the things that, so keep it like this. This should be the biggest restriction when writing automated tests. That is using thread.sleep. So from personal experience, a lot of QAs, especially in early stages, they try to avoid using explicit weights or fluent weights because they are a bit challenging, let's say, to construct. And what they would oftentimes do when running a script is if something takes more to load, they would just do time.sleep. A thread.sleep is in also written in .NET, so this depends on the language you use. And when they do so, what happens is this pauses the code that is being run. So it's not like a wait. It's not waiting for something to happen with a specific item. It's not an implicit wait because that, again, it is related to the code being executed. This actually pauses everything. And what is the issue with pausing this? Imagine you have a car and you want to get from point A to point B. If you were going every day with the car from point A to point B and back, and every time you're just driving and you stop and wait for a period of time and start and stop and start and stop, but at random intervals just so you can make it work. So we're not talking about traffic lights, but you're just driving and stopping at a specific time interval for something to happen. Obviously, it's gonna wear out in one way or another because you're going to be doing unnecessary actions at some times. A better example would be imagine you're just stopping and turning off the car. So not in front of a light, you just stop in front of a crosswalk. People are walking and you just turn off the car. You don't want to be doing that because what this does is when you run your tests and the application stops executing just to wait for something, stops the run actually, uh, it actually affects the tests themselves. So you might fix one test, it will work, but then another might be affected due to this. So another one might be run and might time out. Another one might also be throwing some kind of other internal error or whatever it may be, simply because you use too much time.sleep or thread.sleep, however you want to name it. And this is a must in all automated tests. I would say it's okay if you want to debug. So if you want to see what's happening in a specific scenario and you just put thread.sleep to check what is happening visually with the elements, that is perfectly fine. But definitely avoid using thread sleep in your final test scripts. It will heavily affect your entire suite and definitely will impact the time needed to execute the test, which at the end of the day, that's also very important aside from the performance. Second, which we talked a bit about throughout this lecture, is poor naming conventions. So again, this doesn't only tie into automation testing. This is a general coding practice. So when you construct any type of framework, you want to make sure that everything that you have as a variable or a method is understandable by everyone. So that means if you're constructing locators, always try to follow clean code principles, which they are documented on the web, and try to make the variable names as clear as possible. So if it's a submit button, you can name it a submit button. If you're trying to construct a locator, don't try to use the, let's say, absolute XPath that we saw earlier that has div, body, form, so something that somebody might not understand where it is located, but always try to make sure it is clear and concise. So try to use maybe a tag like button and then add extra content like class equals submission or whatever that may be. So we always want to make sure that everything is named properly so that others might know later on what these things are used for, and of course for maintenance. Then automating two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication can't be really automated. So this also applies to CAPTCHA. So you can't really automate this process because it has been implemented to essentially avoid bots and also basically data scraping. And when you use Selenium, it can also be used for data scraping. So no matter how you use it, you will never be able to bypass them unless you, let's say, have agreed with the team. So you say that you want to disable the two-factor authentication or the CAPTCHA. This could be okay in some scenarios on a lower environment, so you can probably do this in development, but it's highly recommended to never do this, especially not on production staging. You don't want to disable something that is security, that is connected to security. And it doesn't really matter if you run the test on one environment and then skip it on two. So that's why avoiding automating two-factor authentication and essentially CAPTCHAs is a best practice. So you can usually run these scenarios manual. It's less time consuming and it's more than enough to cover them. Automated logins of Gmail, Facebook, or similar sites. So you noticed even earlier when we were trying to copy paste some things into Amazon, some of us were getting this security issue. And yes, if you try to do this on Gmail, on Facebook as well, they will notice that Selenium is a bot. And because you have a specific IP that they might not have marked that can use Selenium for it. So they might have some kind of firewall that says, okay, these IPs can use Selenium or JMeter or whatever to run their tests. They will most likely see it as a security threat. So if you want to practice, you have example.com, you have Swag Lab. So we saw the sauce demo. You can use those pages. They're perfectly fine and are pretty challenging if you want to write some automated tests. The last two bits are test dependencies. So this is uh, uh, basically you don't want to, how should I put it? You don't want to have dependent tests. So you don't want to have them in a way that you write one test and then that test adds into another one, that one adds into a third one. So you don't want to make them dependent on each other. Each feature should have its own separate test, its own isolated test, and it's the best practice to keep it as such, because it might be a scenario where you might forget to add an order to how the tests are executed, and then this test does not execute in that correct order that you expected, because sometimes it just goes through the one order that is given by default. And in that case, you might have a failing test simply because it was dependent on another. So having dependent tests is not ideal. And one good thing to do is, if you do need, let's say, to test an entire flow, you can actually create, let's say, the tests, like to create them separately for visibility reasons, and then just ignore the other two tests and use all of the data in the single one, which is the final one that inherits from the others. And in that way, you don't depend on anything else. You execute one that takes values from another. Again, this is not something that happens that often, but should be avoided. Finally, we have performance testing. So as tempting as it is, Selenium should not be used for performance testing. There are external tools that are meant for this. So their only purpose is to test performance. So be that load, spike testing, database volume, incoming volume testing. So everything related to performance. And why you should not use Selenium, primarily if you try to use Selenium, let's say multitude, try to simulate multiple users using Selenium, most of the time you might get a security threat even on some of your project pages where you are already allowed to use it. And in addition to that, it can't really scale as well as these other tools. So you can't really simulate 100,000 users with Selenium. You can do that with JMeter, you can do it with K6, you can do it with Gatling, you can do it with these tools, but Selenium is absolutely far fetch from those. So performance testing should be avoided with Selenium at all costs, because again, it's a tool mainly meant for UI testing and bits for API testing. Do you have any questions regarding the practices to avoid for Selenium? Okay. I don't see any questions so far. So we have just one more bit of the content here, which is outlining a Selenium script. So one thing to note is, before you start writing any scripts, any code or whatnot, it's good to have an idea of what you want to test. Now, in most cases, you will probably have already created your own test cases. You might have even created a Gherkin syntax, so a BDD approach to testing. So you might have like given the user is on the Amazon page when they enter blah, blah, blah. So you might have this approach as well, but you generally need to have something that you follow when you're creating your Selenium scripts. So that's why we have this little exercise here. And it says, imagine you were assigned to write a test to validate that the headers of the e-commerce page are displaying correctly. So let's say we have that scenario in hand. So we need to come up with an outline of what steps we need and what data do we need to conduct this text. So what we can do now is we can open up Amazon right here. I'm just going to close this. We don't need it for now. And refresh it. And let's say we're trying to see if all the links or headers, however you want to call them, are displayed and working as expected. So what things would you write down to make sure that this works? So what steps do you think would be appropriate to be taken as part of our Selenium script? So to make sure that the headers are displaying correctly. You can write them in the live chat. We can also try Gherkin later on a bit to see how that can be written down, how we can write down the steps in a Gherkin format. So what do you all think? What steps or what data do we need to check whether the headers are displaying correctly on the Amazon page? I see some people are writing in the chat. We'll wait a bit. Again, there are no wrong answers, so this is just to see what is your idea, what would be your approach, what steps do you think we would need? What are, let's say, the steps that are easiest for you to follow if you were to do this test? Again, it differs from tester to tester. Okay, I'll also provide mine. We'll see. I'll also put down something. I think, for example, it's important. So because we're probably going to be testing, let's say, Amazon in this case. So I will start by saying that we need we need to visit the page. So I would probably write down something like this, steps, and I will put down visiting the Amazon homepage, let's say. This is something I would do. So I would add this as a step. So let's see if some of you have something else to add. So we're trying to test the wonderful. Thank you, Seraphim, for the add-on to the explanation. So what else can you automate here? Think of it as simple test cases with steps, but for your own use, let's say. So how would you uh, note them down? I can also add something for assistance here. I would say visiting the Amazon homepage. I would say um, verify if the headers are displayed. This is something I would like to do in my test, so I want to see if they're displayed. I see Seraphim wrote, are the spellings of the headers correct? Yes, that's correct. Verify if the spelling of the headers is correct. What else can we actually add here? So you can also just mention if you think we need some test data, maybe. We can also think, so let's say we want to see if they're displayed correctly. Me personally, I also want to check if they are working, so not just displayed. I see Valentina wrote if they're clickable and enter the landing page. Yep, okay, that's a very nice bit. I can copy it and I can add it here as well. So I can put it down as number 4. Brilliant. And I see Binu wrote launch the browser, navigate the e-commerce page. Okay. Locate the header by inspect, maybe by ID class, get the text from the header, verify its header as expected. Wonderful. This is a very in-detailed explanation. So we can also write that down as a separate, even as a separate test case to what I was writing right now. Wonderful. Good job, both of you. So yeah, launching the browser, navigating to the page, locating the header, inspecting it with an inspect element, getting the text from the header, verifying it. Wonderful. Yeah, all valid scenarios. Now, one thing I would add here. Uh, so what I will now I want to show you a bit what is my approach to when I'm writing a test script. Now, I'm a very big fan of the Gherkin methodology. And when I'm writing my automated test scripts, I usually want to use the given, when, then scenario. So I want to run you down through, let's say, a simple search scenario. So what I usually do when I'm writing my automated tests is first I want to define what's the scenario. So let's say we want to find an item that we want to purchase on Amazon. Let's say that is the scenario. So I'm going to say uh, searching and selecting an item from Amazon. Let's say uh, this is the scenario. So first I want to note down in the scenario what I'll be doing so that I have, let's say, clarity and what I want to test. So when I have the scenario, I know, okay, I need to see if the search is going to find what I need, and I need to check whether I have the correct item. All right, so what do I need to do? If I see I need to go to Amazon. So the first bit of any test is we need to make sure the page is working. So when we visit the page, we want to make sure we can access it. So um, it is not broken by some internal server issue. So I would say, given the user is on the Amazon homepage, so making sure that this works, then we said we're going to search. So if I go to the Amazon homepage, we see we already have the search here. So I can immediately say I input some valid term. When I input a valid term inside the search bar, so I can enter basketball, let's say. There we go. And now what is the next step I say? So I can technically just say search for the term, but I want to be a bit specific so I know what actions I'm going to use for Selenium. So what I usually do is I would write, and I select the magnifying glass to search for the item. So I'm not just writing and I search for the item because it's a bit more broad. I actually say what I'm testing. So I'm also testing whether the CTA, the button, the magnifying glass is also working and retrieving the results. So I would say, and I select the magnifying glass to search for the item. So I do that. And then we see when I click it, I see a list of results. And now I want to, let's say, select the item. So then I can write. Then I should see a list of, let's say, results related to my search. because we're probably going to see something related to it that is expected. So if I write a basketball, I should not get maybe a computer as a result, right? And now all it's left is to select the item because we're done with the searching. We see that we have the search results, and then what we have left, selecting it and then viewing the content. So all I can say is when I select the desired item, then I should see the item's specification. So what do I expect? When I select it, I should be able to see the item and its specification. So if I go back to Amazon, if I click on the first basketball, we will see that I can see the item in its entirety. I can see some details about it, the price, size, weight, so everything related to it. Now, why do I want to note down everything related to my automation test like this? I first want to simulate a scenario that the user would do. So obviously, when searching for items, they would want to enter the specific name of the item and select it. The thing about it is that they also expect to see similar items. They might like the second item, right? So when we're searching, we set a list of results related to my search. So they might select a different item. And what I do is I essentially write everything as gherkin because in my experience is a lot faster than like when we're writing test cases, and it's a bit clearer for how we want to execute the scripts themselves. And when you do this, what you can do, so you've already written down each scenario, right? Each step actually, you can actually say, okay, so what do I need to automate? I need to go to the page. So we're gonna go with our driver to the page. And then I need a method to input something inside the search. So this is the second part of the test. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method, which I click the magnifying glass. Or I can also combine both. We will see at the end. Then I have to assert something because and then it tells me I should see a list of results. So here I would probably need to check if the results are related. So I assert here. And then again, I perform another method to select something, and I finally assert whether everything is correct. So I immediately know that I will have about one, then combine these two, three, four, five methods, and in all of them, I would need to perform the specific action. Again, this does not need to be added into the code. This is just to simplify the thought process and how to know what to cover. You can also follow your own test cases if that is easier for you. Of course, for me, again, I just want to do this gherkin layout because in BDD it's a bit more simplified to create methods related to it inside the code. So this is something that I recommend if you want in your free time. You can also practice. You can also check out a bit more on the gherkin syntax, and it's very easy to kind of do a mind map of all the tests that you would want to execute when doing this. Do you have any questions related to this small exercise? Okay, if there are no questions, I think we can move with the Kahoot for today, and that will be basically it. So let me just see which window it was. I think it's this one. Perfect. So let me just open it up like this. I'm gonna just go here, open the Selenium Kahoot. Okay, there we go. All right. So you should see the pin any second now. And you can start joining in on the Kahoot. Just move this a bit here. Let's try to join in so that we can see some of the bits that we went through in today's materials. I know it was a bit of a more, I would say, theoretical lecture. The next one is more hands-on. We will have a lot of examples to cover, and we will see Selenium in action. But again, it's just as important um, to know the theoretical part behind it, because again, it's that knowledge that will support you when you're writing the scripts themselves. I see people are joining in. Right. We'll wait for a minute or two more because we have a bit of time, and then we'll start it off. Thank you, Seraphim, for sharing the link as well. Okay. All right. So in the interest of time, to not have to make you wait a bit longer, I think we can start it for now. And if somebody joins a bit later, they can also view it here on the screen. They can see and try to guess the answers as well. So I'm just going to start the Kahoot right now. Here. All right. Let's see what we got. Which of the following is a gherkin keyword in BDD? Let's see. We just discussed this, so I see the answers are coming in. Very nice. So I see most of you wrote then, and then we had also answers for assert. So assert is actually used by TestNG, and that's to confirm that something is working as expected, so that something is satisfied. Whereas gherkin, as we mentioned, followed given, when, then, and end. So these are the four keywords that we use for gherkin. So good job, everyone. And I know it can be a bit confusing, again, because an assertion is needed, then is the assertion in Gherkin syntax. All right, let's move on to the next question. Which Selenium locator is typically the fastest and most reliable to use? We mentioned that one of these is, let's say, the best option as well. So maybe that's a bit of a hint. Wonderful. All of you went for ID, which is the correct answer. Again, if you have the option, always prioritize using the ID as a locator. Okay, let's move on. Which step in the following Gherkin scenario represents an action? So we have a text here. What is an action? Try to relate it to the Selenium actions as well. All right, some of you wrote, when I type water filter into the search, and I click on the search icon. So basically, it's when. So the keywords in Gherkin, you can also relate them to what they do. So given is that you're actually somewhere or someplace, right? When is when you do something. So this is the action. And is like an addition to that action. So the main action is actually when. It is a bit confusing, but when you're trying to represent an action with Gherkin, you usually use when. Again, you can use and as well. That's not incorrect. It's like an addition to the action, but the main focus for an action is usually when. But again, good job for all of you. And again, and is a bit of a trick option added here. All right. How can you point the Selenium WebDriver to open a specific website such as Google? You might have seen that in the examples. All right. So most of you went with driver get. That is correct. Again, this is more YAML related. Driver.launch Again, most of these can actually be seen in some other programming languages for the specific reasons of Java. It is driver.get. In some you will use navigate, so it's different for all languages, but nevertheless, good job to everyone. Let's move to question 5. In the following scenario outline, what will the first test case verify? So what will the first case do? Oh, wonderful. All of you went for the third option, which is correct. So we had the -2, the 3, and then the total is 1. So the first line was, in a way, the first test case. So well done to everyone. You're doing fantastic in this run. What is one common limitation of using Selenium for test automation? So what is one, let's say, drawback? Wonderful. It does not handle image testing well. We mentioned this, so it does not have the support to basically compare screenshots. And I see also there was an answer for support for web applications. It does support web applications. It does not support mobile and desktop applications. So I know the application bit can confuse those a bit, but it lacks for those. For web, it's basically mostly used for that. So again, it is a bit of a trick question, but well done to everyone. Right, we have 3 more. What does YAML stand for in the context of CI/CD? Let's see this. We mentioned this we were talking about the CI/CD, so it's an interesting abbreviation, I would say. Most of you answered yet another markup language, and that is correct. It's not very intuitive when you think about something as a document type, but yes, it is yet another markup language. Also, your automated machine language is, I mean, if you don't know the abbreviation, it does make sense to use it because it's used for automated pipelines, and same goes for advanced management because again, you're managing dependencies, but it's actually yet another markup language. I was also a bit flabbergasted when I learned it the first time and we used it then. Which of the following best describes Selenium? So let's see. Which one relates to you most to Selenium? All right, most of you went with automated testing tool for web applications, and that would be correct. Desktop application testing tool is actually not, it does not support it directly. Again, if you want to use plugins, you can add plugins to Selenium and then use it for application testing, but it is mainly used for web applications. Well done. You guys are doing a fantastic job today. Very good. Which wildcard operator in CSS can be used to target an element whose class name ends with a specific value? So ends with a specific value. Let's see, which wildcard item was that? All right. I see the majority went with the fourth option, the dollar, which is correct. The dollar is what gets us the last bit of the string, whereas the star was a specific part within the string. So it could be in the middle, it could be the second to the before last character. So it actually does a specific selection, not necessarily the ending of a string. So I know it can be a bit confusing, especially since these things are new, but still, nevertheless, good job to everyone. We have one more question. When working with dynamic content, like I'm feeling lucky button, which CSS selector approach should be used? So keyword is dynamic content. A bit more tricky. So we see most of you added input value I'm feeling. That is wonderful. That is the correct answer because, again, we don't want to be using the entire text. So it is dynamic. We don't know what might happen with part of the content. We just know that this will be probably there. And then we have the second option, which was ID equals feeling lucky. Well, this is also, I mean, all of these are a okay approach to testing it. The second one always thinks that it should be equal feeling lucky for the ID. And if the dynamic content changes, that means that the ID could also change. So if the ID even changes by a single letter, let's say it's feeling lucky with lucky with two Y's at the end, then it will not be able to reach it. So even one change in the characters in the ID will have a failing test. Same is for the value here. Again, we have equals. Since it equals this value, again, it will probably change if there is some kind of dynamic action taking place, and it will most likely fail. In this case, we're only targeting one bit of it. So we will always have at least one sentence correct that we will be looking for within the value of that element. All right, good job to everyone. We're going to have this podium here at the end. So we have third Binu, good job to Binu. And we have Theodora at second. And then we have, I couldn't see, wasn't following the leaderboard, WebZ. Good job to everyone and thank you for taking part in this Kahoot. I'll just move back to the conclusion. So we basically discussed a bit today what is Selenium. We mentioned that it is a web application automation tool mainly used for UI testing. We talked about its capabilities and functions, that it uses locators, it uses actions to perform some kind of operation with them. So whether it be clicking a button or inputting text in a search box, as well as using a driver to communicate with the browser itself. So remember, it doesn't communicate directly with the browser, uses a driver, which again, we will see later on how it works into detail. I know it was more of a theoretical lecture, but again, it's very important to get the fundamentals behind Selenium in order to be able to apply it. And we will be applying this knowledge that we had today on the next lecture on Tuesday, which will be hands-on Selenium. We will do a bit of coding. We will see also some real project related tasks that we might have to do with Selenium. So I hope that you are all excited for that as well. And yeah, if you have any questions related to the lecture. Okay, if not, then that will be all from my side. And